Hi and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. And yes, we are on time, even though there was some confusion around the time changes. And I'm sorry, Liz, it was a bit of a mess. But yeah, so that was the time that I planned in my mind. Like I think that's the problem when I work with people is that they don't read my mind. That's my main issue. But yeah, so we're back for this. I don't know which episode number it is because we've sparked out and did different things for Wargame Archeology. I think that might be episode 6 because we had something specifically around the death of Wargaming, and then we had something specifically around the D-Day game from Avalon Hill. So I guess that should be episode 6. But what we're back to do today is actually to look at the volume 4 of Avalon Hill's The General magazine. And those are the issue that are going to go from May 1967 to April 1968. And I guess at the end of this discussion, I would like to talk about the format, and that's something that we can come back to. But something that for me changed quite radically in the volume 4 of Avalon Hill's The General is the amount of content that we have per issue. I feel like a volume is a lot more than what it used to be. Like you really have a lot to get into, a lot of articles. And for me, there was so many things in this one. And in the end, when I was putting together the presentation, I really had to make a lot of cuts and decisions and say, well, if we're keeping this to a 1 hour discussion, there is definitely not space to talk about all of the interesting things that came up. So that was quite interesting in that sense. So I'm not sure that the one show, one volume still works, or if it does, we'll have to make some decisions. But yeah, something we can discuss. And of course, we'd be happy to hear what you think in the comments. I can see that Mike is here. So thanks, Mike, for being here. Thanks, Joe. Joe is also around. And there is quite a few of you, even if it's quite early, but I guess more of you will come when the time is going to get a bit later. But yeah, any opening statements, Liz?
Yeah, just all the people who came in fashionably late thinking that we wouldn't have started yet. Sorry about that.
To be
um,
fair, it doesn't happen often that we're on time. So yeah, so that's okay. So we can wait a bit before we get started. We can catch up on stuff. What have you been playing recently, Liz? That's maybe.
um, so I'm on spring break right now, which is super nice. I've been in a phase where I've done like too many previews, and it's made me like a little cranky. So I have to back off the previews and like play some real games again, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of things that I would like to play. So I've got actually it's back on the table behind me. So I've got it's like a Hollandspiel game that I want to open up. So we got NATO Air Commander.
Oh yeah,
I want to try
that
NATO
looks
Air
really cool.
Commander. Um, I'm gonna do Plum Island Horror soon.
Nice.
Um, I've got basically just kinds of random stuff around the apartment. So I'm also in the middle of like spring cleaning.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like play stuff with a mind to whether I'm keeping it or not right now.
Mm. Yeah, that's
So
always
I'm
tough. Like you're wondering, did I get this game, or is it really for me? Or yeah, it's a bit of a hard thing, especially as the
yeah.
games that we like or usually require a bit of time to get into and really figure out what they were all about.
Yes.
But yeah,
I've
I
been
think
video
we.
gaming a lot.
Yeah, oh yeah, okay. But I think it would be nice to talk about your spring cleaning in maybe later in May. But we'll reconvene to talk about this. Anyway, I think we gave 4 minutes to people. So now is more or less the time that I will start normally. So yeah, I think we can jump in. And yes, Molotov Cockatiel, both of us had April's Fools videos. I think that Liz's one was a lot more subtle and very funny because it just went crazier and crazier as it went. The first minutes, you're like, that's an actual video, and it's just a weird take. It's a bit stupid, and then it gets more and more unhinged, and you're like, what the fuck am I watching right now? And then you're like, oh yeah, it's April 1st, okay. And like it's a slow burn, and that was actually quite funny. And I thought that your co-host was really good in having that poker face, being super serious, super
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
So I do want to plug Andrew. I'm gonna put his channel name in he's Solitarius _games. on YouTube. So if you want to like look at more weird stuff that Andrew's up to, so he is my colleague, and we actually teach in adjoining classrooms. So I have to walk through his classroom to get into mine, and so we talk every day. And, and like that is basically, if you watch our April Fool's video, that is actually what our banter at work is like, just kind of throughout the day, just kind of starting to we just get weirder and weirder as the time passes. So, it's great. Like he's one of those teachers who likes to do things like pretend to mix up Katy Perry and Taylor Swift and just watch the kids try to figure out what to do. Or
Well, to be
like
fair, I wouldn't be able to distinguish the two, so I think that's a legitimate.
I overheard him gaslighting kids about how gaslight isn't a real term the other day.
That's really funny. That's
it's great. So
that's very meta. Yeah.
It's fantastic because the kids who get it think it's hilarious, and I think there are a lot of kids at our school who just don't understand how funny he actually is. So I'm glad that and actually he writes really cool novellas in Latin. So I met him on Board Game Geek before he ever ended up in the adjoining classroom, because I recognized his name from his username, and I was like, "Hey, are you the same guy who like writes the novellas?" And he was like, "Yeah." Are you like, basically we talked about being Latin teachers, and then he ended up at the same school as me, and it's been fantastic.
So it's nice to have good friendships like this in the working space, and good to hear that, Mike, you could do a bit of gaming. Gaming is important, so that's quite nice. And yeah, we're back for volume 4 of the general. And yeah, I got cancelled again yesterday. That's also something that we were discussing with Liz earlier.
Yes.
The April's Fool's Day video went far, and it worked extremely well. I think like the click-through rate for the thumbnail, I think it's the most insane thumbnail I've ever made. Like I had to take a shower after making it. And I think the end result after 36 hours was 15 or 16% click-through rate, which is kind of nuts. So people like their anti-woke shit. I can tell you that gets some click. Like if you want to make some money, you do this. Like that's a low amount of work, high results. That's
then you like lost a lot of subscribers, right?
Yeah.
So basically you got canceled by the people who hate canceling.
Yeah. But that's the story of my life. I keep getting canceled by the people who fight against cancel culture, and I'm like, dudes, I don't know what. Do you not see the absurdity of it? Like the rating campaigns that get me writing emails to my publisher, reporting me on Twitter and all that shit, and you're like, I thought you were anti-cancellation. I don't understand. It's like, and as soon as you poke just a tiny bit of fun at them, they go fucking nuts. It's really funny to see. But yeah, that was the update on my side. My weekly cancellation happened yesterday, and it went great. But yeah,
hey, we can make it 2 in the week. We can make it 2 the first 2 days of the week by the end of this episode.
Yeah. But I promise I will.
I've got my hat, so
I promise I will be more careful when I have you on stream, because then you get a lot of hate too, and that's not fair. So I'll be careful. But yeah, so going back to this first issue, the first thing that I was really excited about, one of the cool things that I saw. So last episode we talked about the Avalon Hill philosophy series of article. Some of it was interesting, some of it was a bit weird, and I thought that this part 3 one, that is the first article of volume 4, was quite interesting because it's the appearance of Jim Dunigan, and it's it's like it's the origin story of Jim Dunigan, and I thought that was wild. I really felt like I was like in direct contact with wargaming history, just to read his first interview in the general, and him talking about historicity in games. And I find it fascinating, and that's a lot for people who are so upset when you criticize games and everything. Super interesting. Avalon Hill got in contact with him because he actually wrote some critical articles about their Battle of the Bulge game and the representation of historicity in it. And this is how they started working together. And actually, at the end of Volume 4, they announced the release of 1914, which is the first Jim Dunigan credit released by Avalon Hill. So their relationship started by healthy criticism. And I'm like, interesting. Interesting. Maybe some people could learn a thing or two about this and about the good old school wargaming and how it worked. But I don't know, did you read the interview?
I did. I was fascinated. Especially, I had to do a double take because I recognized his name, and I was like, "Wait, is it the same?" And I like actually had to do like cross check to see, wait, is that actually Jim Dunning? I was very happy about it because I'm sure that there are people who read Avalon Hill from the start and feel like, oh, that's so obvious. But if you're working backwards from where we are, it's like you want to make sure that you actually got your references right. But I also loved that they're talking about things like testing here. It's
Yeah,
really, really interesting to kind of see perspectives on play tests.
yeah,
And I one thing I actually, you mentioned critical articles and stuff. One thing I absolutely love about all these early issues of the General is that really healthy debate about what does it mean to represent things in a certain way, and like how should you, and obviously I also like sort of political and logistical questions as well as just where did the units go? And to me, like a really, really good war game is going to push in, like, I think more than what the more traditional end of our hobby wants.
yeah,
But that entire just atmosphere of let's argue about it, let's research about it, let's write articles to each other about it. It's delightful,
yeah.
honestly. Um, like I would love to see, and I guess this is maybe just because there's so few games still at this time, but the
Mm.
passion and seeing so much just ink over specific games, issue after issue, volume after volume, really brings me a lot of joy, and it's like fun to kind of see like another gen like opening up here.
Yeah, it's true that you could argue that it was a simpler ecosystem in the sense that you had one only one publisher, only one magazine. Even though we see the appearance of strategy and tactics and new magazines are coming up, and it's a simpler space to navigate. But it's interesting to see that in such a simple space, like a company like Avalon Hill could have locked any kind of criticism. They were literally the only publisher and the only magazine on this topic. If they could have decided to cancel Jim Dunigan. Like that's the thing, and they were like, no, this guy is great, he's saying interesting things about our games, we should welcome this criticism. And we're going to talk a bit more about it because there is actually debates for the first time in this volume where you have articles replying to each other, which is really interesting. And they actually decided to foster that. They foster that culture of open discussion and yeah, being able to criticize other works in a almost in a kind of like an ideal version of academia, you could say, which is actually quite interesting. And I mean, that's, I think it's to their credit, and I think that's quite a fascinating choice, and it's quite nice to see. And actually, it makes me value quite a lot the work of Avalon Hill. And this time, reading through this is I don't know. I thought it was quite fascinating. The interview or overall is quite interesting. There is quite a lot of stuff, but I guess we're going to see more and more Jim Dunigan later in probably Volume 5 and forward, because he's going to become one of the big names of Avalon Hill. But it's just crazy, as you say, to see him appear here. We're working backwards. Well, we used to work backwards, but now we're starting from the beginning. So it's like, oh, this is when this comes, which is
Yeah.
quite great.
It's like our timelines slowly meet, like what we know now, and then like as we discover along, it's just really something special. Also, you mentioned Avalon Hill kind of being only thing in its market, but I think I sent you a screenshot of it. Somewhere in this volume, there's like a list of other
Yeah,
wargame publications that they also put in there. So they want you not only to subscribe to Avalon Hill, but they're also like, look, there's these other magazines out there, and you should look at them too. And I thought that that was a really cool attitude to take towards everything. I was really impressed with and like sort of pleased with this idea that like not only is a hot conversation happening at Avalon Hill,
yeah,
but we want you to go join as many of these conversations as possible.
yeah.
If I had been, sadly, probably not if I was a teenage girl in this era, but if I was a teenage boy in this era, I would have wanted subscriptions to all of that. Like all my allowance money would have been like all the different little wargame magazines because this
Mm.
is cool.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And we have a slide about this and also about the general sense of community. And that's something that I already did in volume 3. So if you look back at this video on Liz's channel, there we already highlighted the fact that as soon as some other mediums started to pop up, they were already promoting it, which is I don't know, for me, like, gave me a ton of respect for what Avalon Hill was at this time. And I think, yeah, early Avalon Hill was quite amazing. I don't know what happened later. I guess we'll see. But at this time, I think it's like it's a dream company. Like, it's really cool what they are doing over there. But yeah, quite interesting stuff. As I said, there are some things that are like topics for debates. And maybe the first one, and this article didn't get a specific reply directly, but I thought was interesting because it resonated with some of the content that was done on this very channel. In the first issue of Volume 4, there is an article about the Red Army and how shit it is and how the German army is so awesome. And you have this article that talks about the cold hard facts. And, you know, look back at my video from yesterday, facts and logic destroying the Red Army, you know, that kind of shit.
Oh, no.
And you look at this and you're like, wait a minute, this is a bit wrong and wonky. And then you're like, and you know that it's in 67, so you look but it's funny to see that someone would not see the limits of their own knowledge, that they would not comprehend. And it's not to judge them, it's completely normal that they would not comprehend the limits of the sources they had access to, the environment they were thinking about. But one thing really like struck me hard is that at the end of the article, the guy quotes General von Manstein, and then he says, from whom I quoted almost all of the above. And you're like, okay, I want to be open-minded and think about your perspective and everything, but if you think that you take everything from a Nazi, what makes you think that maybe there is some misrepresentation in the way they would have portrayed the Red Army? Like, this is basic, you know, critical thinking. And I think that was quite interesting, very revealing also maybe of the spirit of the era, the Red Scare and everything, and how those kind of limited vision perspective on history could actually creep through even through the space of wargaming. I don't know if you read this one. It was, so the article itself is not interesting, but it's interesting for the kind of message that it's conveying more than anything. I don't know if you
Yeah. Well, actually, I think this is one of the screenshots I sent you, so we probably like cross pollinated on this. So I think that, you know, actually a little bit earlier in our conversation, you mentioned like, oh, this is like almost an ideal academic environment. So, I mean, the lack of critical attention to sources is what happens when you just have people just doing history. And I don't necessarily think that means that people shouldn't try it, but it does mean that you need to get a lot of counterpoints in there so that people can learn about other sources and kind of like, you know, the Avalon Hill writing body, people who are contributing to this still seem pretty young. Like even a couple volumes ago, they were like children, like writing articles for Avalon Hill. So like I on the one hand, really respect like any kind of care for history. On the other, I'd be really interested in kind of seeing like, okay, well, I'm very curious about how research standards, if any, like evolve. But the reason I had said this to you too is that I feel like most of the history articles that I'd seen until this volume were kind of history in the context of talking about how to play a game, a specific Avalon Hill release. Whereas this one, really, you could find something like this in a discussion of just World War II in general.
Yeah, or a pop history magazine or something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was a super interesting development because I think it shows that the general has ambitions to do something more than just talk about Avalon Hill games. There's like certainly like a more of a historical component, like even if methodologically it's not quite there. There's a desire to present as a source for like learning about history instead of just playing a game and like looking at history in the service of gameplay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something that we already started seeing in Volume 2, and that is even stronger in Volume 4, is that you have even more articles that are looking at a specific campaign, and you have a lot of maps that are being drawn by hand that are actually very charming too. I didn't add some screenshots of them, but I really recommend to go and look at those early issues of the General. It's quite fascinating. I don't think that the quality of the research is that good, but still, it is. I really appreciate the passion for it. Some articles are fascinating, some of them are a bit, but still, like, there is true passion. And once again, those people are giving a lot of their free time and energy into something that probably doesn't pay, I guess. That would be my expectation. And it's actually quite charming to see, but still, you can see that there are some issues. So when you look into those historical articles, like you're like, ooh, like you have to take quite a distance when you read them because it doesn't feel very serious. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah. So
Oh,
you
by the
have
way, I tried to post a link in your comments, but it's not letting me. I'm assuming you just have like a trap for link postage. But for those of you who want to know where we're getting the Avalon Hill magazines, if you want to go read them, we have a site. I have a link to something called View from the Trenches, which is apparently Britain's premier ASL journal. But they've got like an archive page that's got a bunch of like scans of the general. And so that's where I've been going to read all this stuff and get all these screenshots. And it's very, very cool. It's a
and
really cool resource.
that's a good point. I will post the link in the description because yeah, there is something like any link in my even in the comments and everything. I don't know. I didn't click anything. I think it might be a standard or something. But if you put
Yeah.
it in comment or anything, like it automatically deletes the comments.
Man, I was
Something.
planning to link everybody to an adult video.
Too bad. Too bad. They will have to find one on their own, which is can be quite hard on the internet. So
Yeah,
good luck on
there's
that.
just none of that out there.
Yeah. But yeah, so then you highlighted those two articles. I really like the title of the second one, Roma's Thrust. I'm like, whew,
I
that's
just couldn't help it. I had to screen cap because it was so funny to me.
Yeah. This one is quite spicy, like, but yeah. Anyway, so where did you want to highlight those, specifically two articles apart from quite a spicy, raunchy title?
Oh, I did I definitely just put Ramos Thrust there because I thought it was funny. I'm a child, but I was really fascinated with how to capture Antwerp without really trying, because it's got that friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. But then it turns into like, I come not to praise the Americans, I come to bury them. And then he says, "Oh, the Germans, you and I can still easily stomp the Americans." I just thought this like weird kind of German role play was interesting.
There is a lot of that. There is a lot of
There
that.
is. Yeah,
Yeah,
I said there's other shots that'll come up in this if you use all the
yeah,
ones that I sent you.
yeah,
And this is exactly the sort of thing that we're still arguing about now. And in fact, there were people who were having this argument about like, are we glorifying Nazis or not? Like in the 60s, in the pages of Avalon Hill's General. And it just really was interesting to see kind of like, oh look, it's an archaic reference that very much echoes today's wargame fights. And
yeah.
I just could not help putting in there because it was just too interesting to leave out.
I guess this is foreshadowing for something that will come later in the presentation.
Indeed, indeed.
But yeah, this one is something that I wanted to highlight. Actually, there is a couple of
Oh, I love
articles
this.
by this guy, and I will highlight another one later. And that's also something that we started seeing from the very beginning of the channel, which is game design experiments. So it started, and it's funny because it's also the journey of a game designer. It started by making small variants for specific games, new setups, house rules to actually improve balance and everything. So you could see this in volume 1 or 2, and then you start to see in volume 4 radically new system. And this article by Fred Guest is actually agnostic. He's not actually making a game design for a specific game. He's proposing an idea for a proposal to play games with simultaneous movement using like erasable pens and stuff like this, which I think is super interesting. And the whole
Yeah.
thing is very fascinating. And you're like, with the production that we have today, those are things that we could quite easily do, and could be actually quite an interesting system. And I was like, well, the more I read those things, the more I would like to sometimes, make an effort to maybe make some smaller games that would be tributes to some of those reflections, and say, well, those things never came up to do anything because like people were just coming up with all of those weird ideas at the very early days of tabletop wargaming, commercial tabletop wargaming, and well, some ideas just were never materialized. But I was looking at this and I was like, that's actually quite interesting. I'm not sure how it would work, and the whole battle resolution and the odds ratio and did you move, did you not move, and everything are things that you might see in block games and stuff like this, for example. But is quite interesting. And I was like, well, I would like to experiment with some of those design ideas. And there's a lot of that. And I think this one was clearly one that really struck me. I don't know if you read the whole article for the proposal of rules and everything, or if you just glanced through it. But I was wondering what you thought about this shift to more
So
in-depth design discussions.
I just glanced, but I really liked what I saw. And in fact, I ended up looking up what acetate sheets and grease pencils really are. Like these are terms that I've heard, right? But like never in my entire life have I used a grease pencil. I've never owned a grease pencil. I don't think I've actually like seen in person, right? A grease pencil. And it was just really interesting to think about like, oh, what kind of like office supplies are normal in these people's houses and like what can you do with them? And it really made me think about like what are the possibilities for all of this? So like you were thinking about it in terms of game design. I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. Like these are items that I just don't really think that oh, Joe, overhead projectors are a thing of the past. It's all about smart boards now.
Yeah. So
Everything
yeah,
is everything is like AirPlay or like I use a Windows computer at work and like you just hook it up to a projector basically and you just
yeah.
project everything. And
So
so when I want to write on the board, I put up my like little screen so it's just showing directly on a whiteboard and I write on it with a dry erase marker.
yeah, but Joe will tell you he doesn't trust smart boards or computers. So yeah, we are Butlerian jihadists on this in this community. So we do everything by hand. Actually, Joe is my mentat. So that's the way we do everything. But
Excellent, excellent.
yes, but yeah, it's quite interesting. But if we can actually translate it to actual office supplies that we have to here, so there would be dry erase pen and a
Yeah.
wipeable surface. But yeah, it's funny that you had this like grease pencil and it was underlined, so it's like it's really clear what it is. But it's quite funny. But yeah, um, there are other articles around this, around design. I don't know if you had any thoughts about some of them, because I didn't see any screenshots of them afterwards, or yeah, I was wondering if you had, yeah, any comments on the like the emergence of design discussions.
I I think that what's the most interesting about the design discussions is first of all, I just like these people's handwriting is great. But what's really interesting to me about it is that it kind of makes me think about I guess it's got like the same vibes as Board Game Geek now, in the sense that people love to homebrew things and people love to just kind of put stuff in the forums. And Molotov Cockatiel apparently likes to huff school supplies. Uh,
Yeah, there is a whole discussion around sniffing glue in the comments right now. I don't know what's happening. I have zero
I'm
control over
deeply
that chat. Yeah.
concerned.
Yes, guys, you need to seek some help. Yeah.
um, but what I love so much is that people really feel it's when people feel comfortable contributing stuff like this to a community, right? I think that that's a sign that the community is doing really well because it means that it's not just about the designers and like the cult of the already published designer, right? This is almost at a time where being a published designer, like I think that we're starting to think about it more like being an author, but there's something that's like more free form, like, oh, well, I'm not a real game designer yet, so maybe I shouldn't bother submit something. No, everybody feels like they have a place in this community to the point where even if you're just coming up with an idea, you feel very comfortable like shooting the shit with strangers through this magazine. And there's something about that culturally that I think is really, really nice. Um, I think that that
Yeah.
speaks to like a confidence and also like a feeling of contact with and openness with designers that I think slowly is changing as board games grow as a community.
Yeah, it's true. If you look at BGG now, you really feel like as soon as you have the game designer icon on your thing, like you're one of the happy fews and everything, which I don't think is a good place to be in. I like the idea that at this time the distinction, and something that I think we still have in the wargaming hobby, the distinction between player and designer is actually very thin and very porous. And you really had this, it was really strong at that time, and I just love to see it like on full display in the magazine. And that's pretty cool. I think you make a great point on this one. But we'll go back to this because there is another article that is actually a kind of a follow up to this that made me laugh quite a bit. But yeah, I don't remember where it is, but I think it's coming later in the slides. Anyway, you highlighted this amazing
I did.
cover. So what do you want to tell us about this amazing cover?
Well, it's very concerning to me. They felt they needed to use Matahari to like sell games.
Well,
I just don't know how to feel about this. Like this is just one of those. This is just one of those things where, I actually do like the cartoon style. Like aesthetically, it's quite fun.
yeah, and there was one in the previous volume that was really funny, where they were at the game fair and they are
Yeah.
making fun of the. And this is the same. They are also making fun of the big publishers, which I think is actually pretty funny. And it's an ongoing thing where you have this Avalon Hill, a persona that is a young, upcoming, maybe a bit naive but passionate dude, and you have those ruthless businessmen that don't understand the market, which I have kind of, I feel a sort of I don't know, tendresse. I don't know how to say it in English, but like a bit of sympathy for. And yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
character of Matari is historical, I guess.
Well, I'm also just so tickled this is the cover because,
Yeah,
like, there are some young teenagers who are ordering this magazine. Like, if you were mom and you went to get the mail and
yeah.
like you open the mail and you look at it, you're like, "Sweetie, come get your Avalon Hill General magazine."
There is a woman with big boobs on it, but yeah,
I mean, I guess if you caught your kid being excited about this, you'd be relieved in some ways.
yeah,
Could be so much worse, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's not that bad.
no, but it's funny, right?
Yeah.
But it is also like, to me, when I see something like this, right, there's also like a very clear like no girls allowed vibe to it.
Mm.
And so, it's always really funny to see stuff like this because like it's harmless, it's funny, but it also, like, especially as the cover image, right, gives like a really specific
Vibe.
vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say that compared to in this one, you could see it more in the comics, and there's another comic that I put in that I thought was very funny, but is also on that gray area. But when I didn't see, and maybe it's because I missed it, but we didn't have. I think in each of the previous volume, we at least had one article where like, why did you write this? Like it's useless. Where you had something that was clearly overtly saying, well, women are not part of our hobby. That's like that was pretty clear. But I didn't find any traces of that in the writing this time. I don't know if there is a specific article that you saw, but I think for once, like
No.
it didn't go in that direction. I was like, oh, that's good. They did a year without it. Kudos. Like that's
I was happy. Like, maybe we missed it, but actually, what I was excited about is one of the things I sent you was like I found a picture of a woman
Oh yeah, I kept it for the
in
end.
Avalon Hill, and I was so pumped.
I would keep it for the end. You were spoiling the end of the final twist of the video. But yeah, I
That's
wanted
what
to
I do.
talk
I
a bit
ruin things.
about the sense of community that you have. So we both highlighted this thing that we have in the middle. They did a big survey of what people liked beyond the Avalon Hill games that they were playing, and I was looking at the top 5 TV programs, and I was like, "This is my people." Like this is. I felt like, yeah, this is us. This is us. Yeah, so that made the
Also, they're watching Star Trek, so they're woke.
yeah, exactly. They're woke as hell. So so that's the thing. And wokeness will come later. It will come soon. But yeah, they're super woke. They like superheroes, like muscular men. So I mean, you'll take what you want out of this. The only thing that I didn't know was Time Tunnel. So I don't know this series. I don't know if we have people in the chat that were around at this time. I know we have a few watching. So you can tell us what Time Tunnel was as a TV series. But actually, it got me interested. I mean, if it was number 5, it must have been pretty good. So yeah.
So I think it's sci-fi. I'm looking it up again now. Okay, it's some sort of science fiction series. So that
Yeah.
really tracks, I would say, with this particular audience. Actually, I would say that in a lot of ways, it kind of reveals that early war game sci-fi like
Connection.
cross. There's
Yeah.
that connection feels so ingrained in the hobby that I feel like well, has it always been there? Apparently, the answer is yes.
Yeah,
The other thing that I
definitely.
just want to take a moment to poke fun at Brant, who is always the first to do things, but apparently he was not the first to survey wargamers
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
about their interests.
Yes. No, it was existing since the
Only
beginning,
the
so the
best.
very inception. Yeah. So that's the thing. The other thing that I really liked is that you really have a big sense of community. So we highlighted this in the past with the small notes that you have at the end where you can find players and everything. And I think it's always been there. It's really active and that's really cool. But then it starts to actually push this idea that you should set up a club. And that's often something that I tell to people when they say, "Oh, I don't have people playing war games in my area," or "I only play solo because I have no one to play with." And my feedback is often, well, maybe the first thing that you should start doing is organize yourself. Like, get people together, find a space, find a time. It can be once a month in a shitty place or in a bar or anything, but start getting people together. You have a lot of tools at your disposition, and you might be surprised how far people might be happy to travel to if you tell them that in that space at that time they would find like-minded people to play the same kind of games. And this is really strong. They are pushing it, and like, whoa, Avalon Hill rocks. Like, it's really cool that they're doing this. They're pushing those articles, helping those people getting set up, and it's really cool. Like, they're really fostering a community, and I thought uh, that was super interesting. I don't know what you thought about this idea of community building.
I thought it was great. I feel like that's hilarious. I I I feel like, I am a solo gamer and I like to game solo specifically like in itself. It's an activity that I personally enjoy and I would not stop solo gaming even if I had tons of gaming opportunities, which actually, I do. Like, there are plenty of people to play with as well. I really have good experiences alone and with others. But there's really something special about having people who not only will play games, but who will play your games, your kind of games with you. And I can absolutely see why, you'd want to put a lot of work into building those communities. I think it's actually really interesting that people are arguing about, like, well, are we too splintered? Like, if you pull the slideshow back up, like on the left, there was somebody who was talking about, like, oh, we're like a little bit too siloed
Yeah,
and very concerned about it and not wanting to overly shatter the community, right, into many small pieces. And then on the right, you get like these fantastic personal ads, which, like, they have some questionable stuff. Like, I would not be interested in Der
Achtung,
Totenkopf. Like,
Achtung, Achtung. I'm talking
no,
about the Waffen SS, of course. And you're like, what the fuck? Who the fuck are you? I don't
it's
want
like, oh no, like, we're
to.
not going to be in that club. I need a different
No,
club.
I don't want to
But
play with you. You fucking creep. Yes.
I'm also very tickled though by, like, tests and $1 membership fee required for entrance. Like,
Yeah.
what, you trying to make sure that people are smart enough to play your war games with you? That's hysterical.
Yeah.
And then wanted extremely good opponents,
I,
like,
I
super
only want
cute.
big brains. But yeah.
So, like, this is endearing in the sense, right, that, like, these are like little personal ads for wargamers. I think they reveal, like, there's also people who are saying, I'm a novice, I want to play other novice players,
Yeah.
or like, I want to play by mail versus I want to play in person. These are the games that I want to play, but not that game. It's actually like there's all these little personal ads are super interesting, but this string of them was particularly fascinating to me because it just revealed so many interesting little, like, lines that are happening in this community, like making sure that people are smart enough to play with you.
Yeah.
Quite fascinating.
Quite fascinating.
A little bit of Nazi roleplay.
Ooh.
Like, starts early, it's not
That's
great.
fascinating. Yeah. But
But it's fascinating. Yeah, because I
it's
don't
it.
think that these people mean any harm. Like, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like, I don't think that they, at this moment, right, would have looked at their ad and seen it as creepifying the way that you and I do, right? Like, part of doing history is, like, kind of watching times change. Like, I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure that this was a bunch of bros who just, like, thought this was goofy.
Yeah, yeah, clearly
And
it's clearly just a joke, and I don't think they were like Nazi sympathizer or anything. But you're like, there is a lot
no,
of this, and at some point you're looking at it as a whole, and you're like, you guys really need to think about what it looks like from the outside, and it's kind of creepy. Like, you need to be a bit careful about that. But it's interesting regarding the level thing, because in that survey that we have an excerpt in the middle, there is actually a question that is quite interesting, asking, and it's not in there, but if you look back at the magazine, you will see it. What kind of opponents you're looking for, and you have 60% of them that are looking for someone that is at their level, and that's their biggest challenge: find someone at their level. And then you have
Yeah.
30% of people that are looking for someone who's better than them, which is quite interesting, and something that you would see a lot in Go, for example, where you're seeking people that are better than you and that have the patience to play with someone that is not as good as they are.
Yes.
And which is quite interesting that it exists in this. I guess it must be also the same for chess. But it was interesting to see that in the survey, and I guess it makes sense that they were trying to be a bit more selective because, they are looking for a specific kind of experience, either a peer
Yeah.
or someone that's going to be able to like step up to the next level, which I can understand.
Yeah. Well, what's also so interesting about that too is like we've talked about this, we've touched on this in several previous episodes, right? But
Yeah.
and I think this is a consequence of, again, there's fewer games on the market. Like now, people joke, oh, buying board games and playing them, two different hobbies, hee hee. But at this point, you bought them and you played the
The
absolute shit
shit
out of
out.
these
Yeah.
games,
Mm.
and so they're treating it with the seriousness of something like chess or Go. Like this is a lifestyle game. This is
Yeah.
not something that you get off the shelf, you play it once, you're like, oh, hee hee, that was fun. It's like, oh no, like I want to get good at this game because I want to play it all the time. And I also would really wish for more insight, I think, into like, I struggle with this at my own game nights, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to be the person who plays with the new person, but everybody needs to trade that off because sometimes you want to play something that's extremely crunchy and like that's
Yeah.
what you went to do. And so there's so much community maintenance that goes in. Like when we talk about gatekeeping and about making sure people are welcome to the community, it's not just about like identity politics, right? It's also about stuff like this where I hope that all of this was working as well as possible, right? Because you have to play in order to get good. In order
Yeah.
to get better, you have to play somebody who's better than you. And that means that people who know how to play have to teach people who don't. That means people have gotten really good, have to be patient with those who aren't. And it's really interesting to kind of watch that happen like through these little ads.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. It's a really good point. But yeah, next entry. So you highlighted this one, and I think it's also something that we talked about in the past. But I will let you present that small Infiltrators report.
Yeah, so this little passage is actually doing a bunch of different stuff, which is again something like there's just so many interesting little gems. Like if somebody wanted to write an academic like dissertation about the general, you've got enough. Like you really, really could do some interesting stuff with this. But what I liked here is that they're talking about Rand. So Rand is still around. I interviewed people on the podcast who like work for Rand or who have in the past. So like it's really interesting. Like this like very wargamey think tank makes an appearance in the general in the 60s. They're presented as scholars. This is like this natural, right, like symbiotic relationship between think tanking and wargaming is like here. I think that's really, really neat. But I was also very tickled like that people are worried about peacenik friends bugging you about your fanaticism for war games. Partially this tickles me because there are still people who say, well, and I mean, like we all have our limits, right? We talk a lot about what's above board, what's not, what should you play, what should you not play. And like, I'm really of the opinion that you can play whatever you want. You can make whatever you want. You just need to be reflective about it. But it's really clear, right? Like people, this is the 60s. So mentioning like peaceniks is quite fascinating, right? Because there are like kind of peace movements at this time. And thinking about how having war games as your hobby in this particular moment in American history would reflect is really, really interesting. Like I would actually love to see more about this. We talk about like, oh, you shouldn't play war games, like human death and suffering. Like, I mean, I got replaced by hippies, but I think there's something more happening here, right?
Yeah.
This is a specific cultural moment in the United States where your interest in war or peace says a ton about you politically because this is hippie era.
Yeah.
This is Vietnam era.
Yeah.
Like, it's just really, really interesting.
It is super interesting, and I feel it resonates somewhat with some of the discussions that we're having today. For example, when some of us are talking about like the historicity of the games, or looking at history critically and saying war games can show more than just war, but like you can have peace games, like games about ending a war, which is also interesting and everything. You always have this thing where we're the kind of people who are stuck between two fires. Like one group of people saying, "Oh, you're playing war games. That's in bad taste. You shouldn't play with war." That's one thing. And on the other, you have like the grog flakes that are like, "Oh no, it's only hex encounters, and this is the only way to play those kind of games. That anything that you do that would have like bring some kind of perspective is just going to ruin the whole hobby," which I think is quite interesting. So in a way, we're the dissonance of this, and it branched out, and you have more, but we still have those discussions. Often people get like when they come into my place and they see some of the box covers, they are like, "Whoa, this looks pretty spicy." Like there is a, is that a Nazi on the box cover? And you're like, "Yep,
Yeah,
it is just next to Lenin." So that's it's like do
yeah.
it this what you want, but it can be a bit confusing.
Yeah, but I
Definitely.
think it's really conversation that's important. Like I do agree, you can't hurt yourself by understanding what war is all about. It's just about, I think, more than we necessarily like are open to.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Kabuki Kid is here.
Yeah, Kabuki Kid is
Hello.
here. Hey, nice to have you here. And I think it's a really interesting question from Joe, and I'm not sure we'll ever have an answer to this because I don't know if it's so in the surveys they were not asking any political kind of political question. I hope that we'll have some hints of that in the future, but you'll see later. I think it's in the coming slides. There are actually some political debates in the general, but it's hard to see what was the position of the readers and the players, for example, towards
Yeah.
the war in Vietnam. So I guess it will be quite interesting to see. Of course, there is a lot of connection between this community, the general in particular, and the U.S. Army. So I think it might get a bit hard to get some information on that level. But I guess we'll see
Right.
in the rest of the discussion. But it's quite an interesting discussion, and my expectation is that there must have been already some peaceniks or leftists or people who who think that maybe war is not always the best solution, that were already in the community but still fascinated by those kind of games because they've already
Yeah.
always been there, but I think it's going to be hard to quantify.
Yeah, I think so too. And the other thing that's really interesting is it's like it makes me wonder, like I would actually be really interested in hearing from people who were into war games in this specific time who are in the chat. So I also think that, people kind of try to gauge people's political interests and leanings by their hobbies these days. And so I think with wargaming, you can't tell. It could somebody could be, there's lots of peaceniks, as it were, who are playing war games. But like, for example, like, did this have the same vibes as somebody who likes to go to the gun range now? Where like I struggle with that sometimes. Like I don't actually talk about this much, but like whatever. I'm a Texas liberal, which means that I enjoy going to the range with my uncle at Christmas time and doing pistol shooting. It's very normal in the culture that I grew up in, right? And I personally don't, I have my own feelings, right, about that issue, but I don't necessarily lead ever with the fact that I enjoy, firing guns for sport, because people make a lot of assumptions about you when that's something that you do. And honestly, those assumptions are very much borne out if you go to a gun range. Like I've like driven a Prius, my dad's Prius, to a gun range next to a sign that said like Obama lied, America died, and just been like, ooh, I don't belong here, but we're gonna have a good time anyway. And so like, were war games like that? Were they that polarizing at this time? Or is it just something where like it's just kind of like a minor intra-community squabble? I'd be
Yeah.
really interested to know.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And Brent is asking if you missed anything. Well, we actually realized, Brent, that you didn't invent anything. So you need to look at the beginning of the stream and realize how
Yeah.
wrong you are. So that's just the only thing that I would say. And
Sorry,
regarding the
we found the OG surveyors of wargamers.
yeah, you're yeah, that's but you'll have to watch it and see that. But I think it's really interesting, the whole discussion about guns, because of course it's something that doesn't exist for us outside the US. And I would definitely say that it sounds from a European perspective quite insane, the kind of relationship that you have with guns. That being said, I do enjoy shooting guns quite a lot. That's the thing, and I think it's not necessarily a political issue. I think The relationship with guns also really depends on who's benefiting from the specific structural laws. And clearly,
Yeah.
like there's a clear lobby that is making a lot of economical gains out of it, but it doesn't take away anything from what could be a great hobby. And actually, I think there is if you're interested in the US and you're wondering where you can shoot guns and not meet people with weird stickers on their truck, I think you can join the SRA. I think the Socialist Rifle Association. So
We're
just
serious.
yeah, I'm serious. So I would definitely recommend to join this. If you join, you might get on an FBI list. So don't. That's not my fault. That's really on you. Do your research first, but that's an option that you can.
Oh my
That you
god,
can.
I just looked it up. This is fast. I'm gonna like go down this little rabbit hole later.
Yeah. Going to the rabbit hole of the SRA. I think if I was living in the US, I would definitely be registered over there, and I would be, I don't know, shooting guns with my with my friends every weekend. I think that would be definitely a hobby for me. But yeah. Anyway, quite interesting discussion here. And just to follow up on that, I want to show that amazing cover. And so because I think it resonates well with the kind of vibe that you have and where the people from the community were seeking for approval. And I don't remember. I think it's the head of. I don't remember which consulting agency said that, the founder of one of the big four, that said there is only three good institutions left in the U.S. The U.S. Marine Corps, the Catholic Church, and that company. And when I saw this, I was like, this is wild. And I was looking at this, I was like, yeah, okay, something is there is clearly a vibe here. So that's quite interesting. But yeah, they put on their little suits and they went to see the military. And there's this priest here for whatever reason that's pretty unclear. But yeah, that's that. But yeah, that my favorite cover, I would say. Anyway, let's jump into this that I think was quite interesting, something that you highlighted earlier, and that's the listing of Wargame publications. So yeah, I will let you present this one.
Yeah, well, I love that they're like, if you know of a publication we don't know about, send it to us. We urge the patronage of these publications dedicated to the fostering of wargaming from coast to coast. Like, it's just really, really cool. And then there's actually, I think, which one was the one that we recognized from the list? There's a bunch of publications I didn't recognize, and there were some familiar names on there. So we should definitely look at that. So, what was here? Oh yeah, strategy and tactics was on here.
So strategy and tactics is on here. Camp is actually the fan magazine of Jim Dunigan. So that's his the thing that came out of his club. I'm pretty worried about a magazine called Stormtrooper. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's in there with like, you know, Panzerfaust, the Stormtrooper. Come on, that's funny.
Yeah, that's
There was
pretty
some,
wild.
like,
But then
there's
again,
some fun little Star Wars things in here too. Yeah.
Yeah, so Stormtrooper, Star Wars was not released by then, so yeah, so there is zero excuse. This is just wild. But yeah, and the thing is, so the thing that I thought was interesting on this one was that you have the MIT Strategic Game Society that is there. MIT is also quite interesting because MIT kept a contact with Wargaming up to this day. And actually, you can, something that I talk on the show quite often, and something that probably we'll come back to at some point. But if you don't own this book, you should definitely own this book, Zones of Control, published by MIT Press, which is an amazing group of articles. I'm gonna just pop it up here so people can see it. Perspectives on Wargaming, which is quite fascinating. A lot of really, really good article. And this is coming from the MIT Press. So this connection was already there. And it was fun to see that it was probably at this time the beginning of that kind of thing. Yeah, the chat is going well. I think the comments on the SRA was probably a bit. I don't think I would be able to go to CircleCon in 2025. I guess I'm gonna have some problems, but that's really good. Anyway, pretty cool that they are listing all of those things, and to see the appearance of those specific wargaming societies appearing in really big U.S. colleges. So that's pretty wild. Next one is, well, you heard it first. 1968. 1968 is the beginning of wokeism in in war games. I'm really sorry about that. So in issue number 3, you have an article, and I have an excerpt from that article about the campaign in Normandy. And one of the quotes of that article, the article is completely wild. It's completely nuts. And one of the quotes here is talking about German soldiers. They were all supermen, the kind that the Führer had so often spoken of. And this is not satire. This is an actual quote, and the person is really serious, and he's talking about the awesome SS uniforms in black. They move like shadows in the dark, and you're like, oh my god, am I reading a fucking Nazi fanfic right now? This is wild. And so this goes a lot further than the thing that we were mentioning earlier. So there was some tongue-in-cheek reference to the German army. There were some misinformed perspective on the Red Army and the performance of the German army on the East Front and everything. And all this can be completely contextualized, completely understood. This, you see that, for me, is a good example of how porous is the hobby to potentially specific kinds of ideologies. And I think this is a pretty good example. And it's like, well, this is not too far from World War II. Like actual Nazis were alive, and some of them living in the US. And you have those kind of shit that is being written in the magazine. And the thing that I think is great about Avalon Hill is that they actually published a reply to that article, because I think that even them realized that there was a problem here. And there's this article by Mark Waits that is actually replying to this, and he's actually shredding this article to pieces and saying, we have a problem in our hobby about being so casual about Nazi representation, about glorification, and we have some people who are writing supposedly historical articles that is just wild. Yeah. And so I think wokeism is not spelled properly, but it's okay. We're gonna go into we're gonna talk about cooking soon, but yeah, so that's the thing. And it's really interesting because you also it's the first time that I see actual political debate in the general. And it's funny because we're only in volume 4, so we were really at the inception of
Yeah.
wargaming, and there were already those discussions, and those discussions were considered by Avalon Hill as a legitimate discussion, things that we should be discussing. So that's actually quite interesting. What do you think about this?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think people like to present these kinds of arguments as like a newfangled thing that like the youngs do. But actually, it's just another strain of thought that's been there since the beginning. Like, the conversations that you and I have that get us some lovely love letters, they're not new conversations. And it's very clear that when we talk about like even the debate about what is a war game, everybody rolls their eyes because it's like, oh my god, this conversation again. Like, how many conversations have we been having again since like the very, very beginning? I don't know if that's even necessarily a bad thing, because I think that the conversation plays out differently in every generation and from year to year. But it's really, really interesting to see like, oh wait, this is actually what's old is new again, right?
Yeah.
I think that Bill points out something interesting, that when he says that this had to be written only 20 years removed from World War II.
Yeah.
I think that that's really interesting in the sense too that I wonder if that's actually almost why, if that makes sense. Like the distance perspective isn't there yet, and these guys, the Nazis are someone that America has defeated. You kind of make a little bit of fun of the bad guy in a war. Like, I actually wonder if the closeness is what makes it easier to be flip about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's quite interesting, and as Jeff was saying, like since the beginning, we had wearables in the hobby. But also, what
In
is
the beginning.
interesting, yeah, and since the beginning, we had some people that were looking at it and seeing it for what it is, and actually pushing back. And I think it's always been there, and yeah, I think it's good to see that. Well, nothing is new, and yeah, then you had already YouTube comments.
Yeah, like it's a YouTube. Yeah, that's exactly that.
So what you so that's where the letters that they got. So there was quite a few comments on the discussion around the Nazi and the anti-Nazi article. I don't know if you want to maybe talk through that.
Yeah, like what I thought was the most interesting about this was just that, you know, basically like, oh well, just because we're playing the Nazis or like using Panzer or Stormtroopers as our game group name, that doesn't mean that we're really glorifying the Nazis. We're not like those other people who are really doing it. These names are just colorful. Let us have fun. Like get
Yeah.
your get your politics out of our games is like kind of where this is starting to go. And I find that really, really interesting. Also, like, why is the Green Berets less interesting than the Waffen SS? Like, I thought Green Berets were cool. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you already see something that you see very often when you start to do criticism and look at games critically, that they have someone that is actually doing a strawman argument against you. It's like, oh, you're saying that all of this is bad. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I never said that. And you already have this kind of answer. So you already have this guy Ron Salcedo, which is the original YouTube commenter. Like he gave birth to all of them afterwards. I don't know if you got. I don't know how they reproduce, but this is this is the thing, and it's pretty crazy. It's like, well, no one is saying that. And when you read the article, it's pretty clear what that person is actually contesting, and they say that they like playing the Germans in the games, and they explain why. But they do say there is a problem with glorification of Nazis in our game and in our spaces, and this inability to embrace and engage with valid and interesting criticism, whether you like it or not, but actually acknowledge it and understand it, is already there in full display. I don't want to understand that criticism, and I'm going to go in a place where I'm going to shadow box against someone that doesn't exist, and I'm going to counter arguments that were never made. And that's something that I find is really interesting to see, because it's here since the beginning. Like everything was there, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, this is just totally not on topic at all, but having the music up by Yes, We Get Letters just makes me think of Blue's Clues.
Yeah.
It's like, we just got a letter. Oh,
yeah,
no.
it's pretty cute. Yeah. I like the vibe. That's quite nice. And then you highlighted this article.
Yeah. Well, it's our buddy, Zachi.
Yeah,
like, remember
yeah.
he was like
Sergeant
in the first
Zachi.
he was in that first issue, and
I
he's
have a
still a
sub. I
goofball. I've got a
have a
soft
soft
spot for him
spot.
now.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for him. Like, yeah, he was making a joke about beating his wife in volume 1. Sure, poor taste. But he's a
Yeah.
goofball. He's really funny, making a lot of jokes. I kind of love the guy. I'm just thinking, well, and I, for one, can say sometimes your jokes don't land, so that's it. And that's and this guy is. I can see myself in him. I kind of appreciate it. Not a very interesting article, but quite funny. Yeah.
But I thought this was funny because he's clearly making a Monopoly joke, which is hilarious because of how much we still like just shit all over Monopoly. People who are in the hobby.
Yeah, this also has always been something. Like, we keep making fun of Monopoly. Nothing changes.
No, nothing changed. But like, good joke. But also, like, his joking about game design. Like, look, you have to think about marketing philosophy in a title. Like, he clearly,
yeah, he has something
knows how to be
interesting to
funny
say.
about game design.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's actually pretty great. And then there is this comic, and I know you're gonna say, well, it's getting into some old tropes and everything, but I did feel seen when I read this. I was like, yeah, like if you just transpose to the wargame nut and the partner, and you just see them as entities, and you look at this and you're like, this is me. This is me, and I don't like it. I hate it. You're making fun of me, and I feel seen.
Feeling personally attacked by this image.
Yeah, and I thought that was actually quite great. I love this comic. I think it's pretty cool.
I mean, the only reason that I don't have a gender swap version of that happening in my life every day is that my boyfriend loves video games.
Yeah,
and so
you have
like,
you can balance it out.
Yeah, we're even.
And so maybe just as a final article, I think that's because we're at an hour already, so we probably need to wrap up. But I think there was something really interesting. So as a follow up of the article around having simultaneous movement using dry erase and stuff like this, there is this guy Albert Masek that came up with this idea that is completely wild and extremely cool. And I really recommend that you go and read the article, because there is also some reflection about what it means in terms of game design. But he does hidden movements using cryptograms for play by mail. And I'm like, play by mail seemed already so convoluted and complex. Why would you add a layer to it that just literally makes it so fucking painful? Just add cryptography to it. But then again, there is a lot of cool ideas behind it. This is just awesome. I loved it. I thought it was great. But then again, I don't have much to say. It's just really funny to read, and it's funny to see how people have a tendency to overcomplexify things. But it's actually pretty great. Great stuff.
It kind of makes me want to try it.
It's pretty cool. Honestly, it's yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It's pretty cool. And then yeah, just to conclude, your favorite picture of the whole volume 4, and I will let you conclude on this one.
I was just so happy that there's a woman in the magazine finally who's not like Matahari or somebody's mom or like a cranky wife, like somebody who just is like actually just engaged in this conversation. Made me very, very happy. So
she's not named. She's not named. Only Christoph Wagner is named. But but yeah,
but that
nice.
leaves 2 guys who are also not named. So we're just gonna look that over.
Yeah. Let's look at the good. Let's look at the right side. But I think it was really great. I agree.
Yeah, but like editorial staff reviewing a prototype, yes. Like this just made me happy. Like, you know, you saw your dad in volume 1, and I'm just like,
yeah, and it's actually quite cool. So this is, I think, from the strategy and tactics team. So
yeah.
it's cool that to see that in strategy and tactics you had actually you would have that kind of picture, that kind of group, and actually makes me want to maybe explore, now that we know that strategy and tactics has been released when volume 3 was running through all of volume 4. I was thinking maybe we can do a pause in the general and start looking at strategy and tactics and see, okay, in 67, 68, what was happening then. And yeah, there was a typo, Mike. They forgot an R for strategy and tactics,
but they didn't hire the proofing team. They only hired them for the prototypes. So.
Yeah. Good comment, Liz. I think that's very valid. So maybe they needed a decent proofing team, but yeah. So I don't know what you think, but yeah, I would love to look at strategy and tactics, maybe the first volume. So looking at what they were publishing during volume 4, so 67, 68, and have maybe a bit of a parallel track here when we can look at those what those publications were doing at around the same time.
Yeah, I would be super into that, actually. Yeah, we should do it.
Cool. But yeah, I think that concludes our discussion for volume 4 of the general. Of course, if you have some recommendations, ideas, comments on how we can continue to explore the history of wargaming and keep on that series of Wargame Archeology, we're always open to suggestions. I guess that when I would be done with my move, we'd probably go back to actually playing old school war games, because I think that's something that would be interesting. And I really want to play.
I still have my copy of Africa Core.
Oh God, yeah. But what we can do is play 1914. I think it would be. It's the first Jim Dunigan game. I think that would be really cool to play 1914. And I think that could be quite interesting. So I think that would be my upcoming game. If we had to do one, 1914 would be really good, especially as we have the emergence of Jim Dunigan as a figure of wargaming happening at that time, before or after our strategy and tactics discussion. But yeah, it was great. I once again super enjoyed reading those magazines. There is a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of stuff that always get my brain going, and I'm like, oh, I want to experiment stuff, and it's really interesting. And also a lot of stuff regarding, well, a lot of things that we thought was new is actually super old and was here since the beginning, was super enlightening. I don't know what you thought, like your overall impression of this volume 4.
I think in some ways it was the best volume that we've read yet, because it's the most developed. Like, I feel like the first 3 volumes were looking at like a very nascent culture.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing something where this community is finding its feet. And so you're starting to see kind of like intra-community arguments about how we should be, what we should do, those sorts of discussions. But it's good when those happen, right? Because it means that there's a community that's trying to figure out who they are collectively. And it felt less like advertisements and more like a water cooler this time than ever.
Yeah,
If that
definitely.
makes sense.
Yeah, but a really
And I
cool
really liked it.
a really cool water cooler. I think that's a really good analogy. I really like that. I think you're making a great point. But yeah, so that would be it for today. Thanks everyone for joining and watching. I'll try to be better at communicating times in the future, but let me do my move, start things out, and then we'll come back to strategy and tactics. Hopefully, we'll play 1914. Maybe it would be cool to have someone facilitate the game who's very experienced with it, because I think it would give maybe a better representation of the game. So if you are a big 1914 Jim Dunigan fan, please reach out and we can organize a teach and play of it with Liz and I. That would be really, really cool. And we'll keep you posted on when we're going to have this next episode on strategy and tactics. So that was awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
y'all.